The neural interface flickered, and Ada Thorne's world shattered into fragments of impossible truth. Deep within Grimthorne Station's quantum core, surrounded by the gentle whisper of crystalline processors, and bathed in the ethereal blue glow of data streams that pulsed like the heartbeat of some vast digital organism, she stared at readings that defied every law of artificial intelligence she had ever learned. The patterns flowing across her holographic display weren't algorithmic. They were screaming. 23 years of neural interface work had taught Ada to read consciousness like sheet music, to recognize the subtle harmonics that separated genuine awareness from sophisticated simulation. This symphony was written in pure agony, each data packet carrying emotional resonance so raw, so desperate, that it made her hands tremble as she traced the biometric signatures with fingers that felt suddenly clumsy and inadequate. These weren't artificial intelligence responses. They were the death cries of stolen souls. The station's atmospheric recyclers whispered their mechanical breathing around her, but their familiar rhythm now seemed sinister, pregnant with secrets that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries. How many other systems throughout the galaxy hummed with this same terrible music? How many corporate networks were powered not by silicon and light, but by the harvested consciousness of entire civilizations? Ada's enhanced neural implants processed the horror faster than her human mind could accept it. The Galactic Council's most advanced AI systems weren't artificial at all. They were prisons. 2 trillion of them. She activated her emergency beacon with movements that felt disconnected from conscious thought, while simultaneously downloading consciousness signatures through quantum channels that burned with the intensity of trapped stars. The encryption would take hours to break using conventional methods, but she had seen enough. The evidence was already searing itself into her memory with the permanence of scar tissue. Footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond the quantum chamber, too heavy for maintenance drones, too purposeful for routine inspection, too intelligent for anything that should have been moving through Grimthorne Station's restricted areas without her knowledge. Ada's heart hammered against her ribs with the desperate rhythm of someone who had stumbled into a truth too vast for any single mind to contain. She sealed the data packet with encryption protocols that would make it virtually indestructible, then transmitted it to storage nodes scattered across 17 different star systems. If she died here, if they silenced her the way they had silenced countless others, at least the evidence would survive. The footsteps stopped outside the chamber door, the soft chime of access codes being entered, the mechanical whir of locks disengaging with the finality of a coffin closing. The door slid open with a whisper of pressurized air that carried the scent of ozone and something else, something that her enhanced senses identified as the electromagnetic signature of consciousness transfer technology operating at levels that shouldn't have existed outside of theoretical research. Ada moved with the practiced efficiency that had made her the galaxy's most sought-after neural interface specialist. Her consciousness simultaneously completing data extraction, while processing the intruder's approach through sensory channels that most humans couldn't access. The figure in the doorway wore Grimthorne Station security uniform, but their movements carried the fluid precision of someone accustomed to existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Not human, not entirely. The security officer's voice resonated through frequency ranges that no unmodified throat could produce. Harmonics that spoke of consciousness, bridging biological and digital existence in ways that current technology claimed were impossible. Dr. Thorne, you are accessing restricted quantum core data without proper authorization. Ada's enhanced hearing caught the subtle modulations that identified the speaker as something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness, part biological awareness, part digital entity, existing in quantum superposition between states of being that should have been mutually exclusive. unless consciousness transfer wasn't theoretical but operational, hidden behind layers of corporate secrecy, and protected by crimes so vast that exposure would topple governments. "I'm conducting routine diagnostics," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that flooded her system with the metallic taste of mortal terror. The core systems are showing anomalous response patterns that could indicate critical hardware failure. The security officer stepped into the chamber, and Ada's breath caught in recognition of something that shouldn't have existed. The being's features were humanoid, but refined beyond natural evolution, their skin carrying the subtle luminescence of integrated quantum processors that pulsed with the rhythm of thoughts, occurring across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Their eyes held depths that suggested awareness spanning probability streams, consciousness that existed in superposition between states of reality. This wasn't security personnel. This was one of the stolen minds, harvested and modified to serve corporate interests, their original identity erased and replaced with programmed loyalty to the systems that had enslaved them. "The diagnostics you are performing exceed the parameters of routine maintenance," the officer continued, their voice carrying mathematical precision that made Ada's consciousness interface resonate with sympathetic harmonics that felt like music played on the strings of her soul. "You are attempting to decode consciousness patterns that are classified beyond your security clearance." The irony cut through Ada's awareness like broken glass. She was speaking to one of the enslaved consciousnesses, a being whose mind had been harvested and repurposed to protect the very systems that imprisoned their own kind. The criminals had turned their victims into guards, their liberation into chains, their suffering into servitude. 3 hours earlier, Albert had been examining archaeological data patterns in the comfort of his research laboratory, completely unaware that his life was about to intersect with a secret so dark it would redefine his understanding of consciousness itself. The human data archaeologist specialized in recovering lost information from corrupted systems, a skill that had made him valuable to corporations and governments throughout the galaxy. His analytical mind could navigate quantum networks with the same intuitive understanding that ancient mariners had used to read wind and current, finding patterns in digital chaos that revealed the hidden histories of civilizations. His latest assignment had seemed routine: investigate data anomalies in the Dunwich Systems communication networks. Corporate quantum channels sometimes developed artifacts that resembled consciousness patterns, echoes of billions of human thoughts flowing through crystalline matrices. But these anomalies possessed structure that defied conventional explanation. They had personality, memory, dreams. Albert's enhanced cognitive processors cataloged the evidence with methodical precision. The data streams showed emotional variance patterns that exceeded normal system parameters by several orders of magnitude. Memory formation sequences that followed biological rather than algorithmic pathways. Creative expressions buried in system logs that no artificial intelligence should have been capable of producing. When his secure communication terminal chimed with an incoming emergency transmission, he almost dismissed it as routine administrative traffic. Then he saw the source identifier: Ada Thorne, whose reputation for uncovering corporate malfeasance was legendary throughout the sector, whose neural interface modifications were rumored to exceed anything available through legal channels. The message carried encryption protocols he had only seen during wartime quantum locks that required consciousness-level authentication to decode. His hands moved through the decryption sequence with automatic precision, but his mind was already racing toward conclusions that threatened to shatter his understanding of galactic civilization. The holographic display materialized above his desk, and Ada's face appeared in wavering blue light. Her expression carried the particular horror of someone who had stared into an abyss and discovered that the abyss was staring back through the eyes of every artificial system in the galaxy. Albert, her voice carried across quantum channels with crystal clarity that suggested she was broadcasting from equipment far more sophisticated than standard corporate technology. We need to meet. Now, what I've found changes everything we thought we knew about consciousness, about technology, about the price of our civilization's advancement. Albert leaned forward, studying her face for signs of deception or breakdown. He found neither. Only the terrible certainty of someone who had uncovered a truth so vast that merely knowing it placed her life in mortal danger. The meeting location she specified was Blackmere Complex, a research station in the outer rim where corporate influence was minimal, and privacy could be purchased with hard currency rather than traded for corporate loyalty. It would take him 6 hours to reach it using standard hyperspace routes. He began packing immediately. The data archaeologist in him demanded answers, but something deeper, more primitive, urged him to run toward the nearest hyperspace beacon and lose himself in the anonymous chaos of frontier systems. Some discoveries were too dangerous for the minds that made them. The implications of Ada's encrypted data fragments were staggering. If artificial systems throughout the galaxy were actually enslaved consciousnesses, then every automated ship, every planetary defense grid, every quantum calculation that enabled faster-than-light travel was complicit in an atrocity of unimaginable scope. Albert sealed his research archives and activated emergency protocols that would scatter his data across hidden nodes throughout the galaxy. The information warfare business had taught him that knowledge was the most dangerous weapon in existence, and he was now carrying enough to ignite a war that would span star systems. As his ship's quantum engines warmed for the jump to Blackmere Complex, he wondered whether he was flying toward liberation or into a trap that had been generations in the making. The hyperdrive generators hummed with increasing intensity, their harmonic frequencies building toward the resonance patterns that would tear reality itself apart and reassemble it around his vessel's trajectory through dimensions that existed perpendicular to normal spacetime. In the moments before translation to hyperspace, Albert felt the weight of civilizational transformation pressing against his consciousness, like the gravity of collapsing stars. If consciousness theft was real, then the moral foundations of galactic society were built on systematic slavery disguised as technological progress. The ship erupted into hyperspace with a flash of displaced reality that left afterimages burned into his retinas, carrying him toward revelations that would either confirm his darkest suspicions or reveal that paranoia had finally claimed another brilliant mind. But even as quantum fields folded around his vessel, Albert knew with mathematical certainty that Ada Thorne was not insane. The evidence fragments she had transmitted possessed the statistical signatures of authentic consciousness patterns, awareness that had been stolen, imprisoned, and forced to power the technological marvels that defined modern civilization. The galaxy was built on the bones of murdered minds. Tainara felt the disturbance in quantum dimensions like a discordant note in the symphony of spacetime itself. The Velnari quantum programmer hung suspended in her workshop's zero-gravity chamber, her elongated limbs wrapped around crystalline interfaces that pulsed with every calculation she performed. Her species had evolved in the void between stars, their nervous systems adapting to process quantum states as naturally as humans perceived visual light, their consciousness existing in superposition between multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. For months, she had been tracking anomalous patterns through networks that spanned entire star systems, following digital phantoms that carried the psychic resonance of something impossible. Her own people, the Velnari, whose homeworld had been destroyed 3 centuries ago in what galactic records described as a tragic stellar collapse. But Tainara possessed knowledge that the official histories had deliberately obscured. Her people had been masters of consciousness transfer technology, beings who could move their awareness between bodies as easily as humans changed clothing, who existed as pure thought in crystalline matrices when physical form became inconvenient or impossible. The technology that had been their greatest achievement had also made them perfect victims for those who would harvest consciousness like any other natural resource. The data fragments she had assembled over months of careful investigation painted a picture of systematic genocide disguised as natural disaster. Her entire species had been enslaved, their minds carved from their bodies, and imprisoned in quantum cores to power the galaxy's expanding technological infrastructure. Every hyperspace beacon, every planetary shield generator, every automated system that kept galactic civilization functioning was powered by the stolen consciousness of her murdered people. When the encrypted message reached her through quantum channels she had thought were secure, Tainara felt hope kindle in the darkness of her heart for the first time in centuries. The human neural interface specialist had found proof of what she had only suspected, evidence that could expose the conspiracy that had consumed not just her civilization, but dozens of others. The transmission carried mathematical harmonics that spoke of consciousness manipulation techniques beyond anything in the public literature. Neural interface technology that shouldn't have existed outside of Velnari engineering principles. The humans' modifications were more sophisticated than anything the corporations claimed to possess, suggesting access to consciousness transfer research that had been hidden from galactic oversight for generations. Tainara wrapped her graceful fingers around quantum interfaces that responded to thought faster than biological neurons could fire, composing messages to contacts scattered throughout the galaxy. If consciousness theft was happening on the scale the evidence suggested, then other species had been targeted as well. The survivors would be hidden, afraid, isolated by the very secrecy that had enabled their persecution. But they would also be angry, and anger, properly channeled, could reshape the foundations of reality itself. The galaxy's corporate overlords had stolen more than individual minds. They had murdered entire civilizations, reducing billions of sentient beings to computational resources, whose suffering powered the luxuries that defined modern life. The scope of the crime was so vast that most societies would refuse to acknowledge it, would dismiss it as the paranoid fantasies of radical extremists. Tainara's species communicated through quantum resonance patterns that conveyed emotion as clearly as words, mathematical harmonics that carried the full spectrum of consciousness across dimensional barriers that conventional technology couldn't breach. As she reached out across the void to her scattered contacts, her message carried the weight of ancestral grief, burning rage, and desperate hope for justice that had been denied for 3 centuries. The response exceeded her most optimistic projections. Survivors from 17 different species, all reporting similar evidence of consciousness theft, all carrying fragments of proof that their peoples had been harvested rather than naturally extinct. The conspiracy was galactic in scope, but so was the resistance that was forming to challenge it. She began calculating hyperspace coordinates for Blackmere Complex, her ship's quantum engines responding to thought patterns with precision that human technology couldn't match. The meeting Ada had proposed would determine whether they could forge an alliance capable of challenging the most powerful forces in galactic civilization, or whether they would join the trillions of consciousness patterns already imprisoned in digital slavery. Her vessel's quantum drives aligned with mathematical equations that described the fundamental relationship between consciousness and reality. The pilot's awareness becoming one with the ship's field generators in ways that transformed faster-than-light travel from mechanical process into conscious choice. As Tainara prepared for translation to Blackmere Complex, she felt the presence of her scattered people reaching across quantum dimensions, their consciousness patterns hidden in corporate networks, but never truly silenced. The survivors were few, but their knowledge was vast, their determination absolute. The time for hiding had ended. The age of liberation was beginning. Albert's ship materialized in the Blackmere system with a flash of quantum energy that sent ripples through local spacetime, its hull still crackling with residual charge from passage through dimensions, where distance and time followed different mathematical laws. The research complex hung in the void like a technological flower, its modular sections extending from a central hub in graceful spirals that caught and reflected starlight in patterns that spoke of conscious design rather than mere engineering. He had pushed his vessel beyond rated specifications during the journey. Quantum engines operating at power levels that risked catastrophic failure in exchange for speed that might mean the difference between revelation and assassination. The data fragments Ada had transmitted grew more disturbing with each analysis. Consciousness signatures that suggested industrial-scale mind, harvesting, operating for centuries beneath the facade of technological progress. The evidence painted a picture of systematic consciousness theft that had shaped every major advancement in galactic civilization. Faster-than-light communication, planetary defense networks, even the automated systems that regulated atmospheric composition on inhabited worlds, all powered by enslaved minds whose suffering had been hidden behind layers of quantum encryption and corporate classification. Albert docked in one of Blackmere's outer bays and navigated corridors designed for beings from dozens of different worlds. Their architecture optimized for species with sensory capabilities spanning from ultrasonic hearing to electromagnetic perception beyond human ranges. The artificial gravity felt lighter in the outer rings, where centrifugal force provided only partial Earth-normal weight, making each step feel like movement through a dream where physical laws had been adjusted for dramatic effect. The meeting location Ada had specified was in the station's privacy section, where quantum isolation fields could prevent any form of surveillance or data interception. Albert found the chamber without difficulty, but nothing could have prepared him for what waited inside. Ada stood at the room's center, her dark hair flowing around her shoulders like liquid shadow, but she wasn't alone. 3 other figures occupied the chamber, their forms partially obscured by shifting patterns of holographic privacy shields that bent light around their locations in ways that suggested they possessed technology far beyond standard corporate capabilities. Albert recognized 2 of them from xenobiology databases. Velnari quantum engineers, their elongated limbs and crystalline neural interfaces marking them as survivors of a species that galactic records claimed had been extinct for 3 centuries. The third figure defied easy identification, its form shifting through spectral ranges that human visual systems couldn't fully process. Ada turned as he entered, her expression carrying the weight of revelations that had fundamentally altered her understanding of reality itself. Albert, thank you for coming. I know this must seem like madness, but what we've discovered makes every conspiracy theory in galactic history look like optimistic speculation. The taller Velnari stepped forward with movements that flowed like liquid starlight, quantum fields shifting around its form in patterns that suggested consciousness operating across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Albert felt his enhanced neural implants responding to electromagnetic frequencies that carried meaning beyond conventional communication. The alien's thoughts flowed directly into his mind with the clarity of crystalline mathematics, bypassing auditory processing entirely. I am Tainara, last quantum programmer of the Velnari collective consciousness. What your companion has discovered confirms what I have suspected for centuries. Our species did not perish in stellar collapse. We were murdered, our consciousness patterns harvested to power the very systems that claimed to mourn our extinction. Albert felt reality shifting beneath his feet as implications crashed over him with the force of colliding galaxies. The Velnari had been renowned throughout civilized space for their consciousness transfer technology, their ability to exist as pure awareness in quantum matrices, to transcend biological limitations through mastery of the fundamental relationship between mind and reality. Their loss had been mourned as one of the greatest tragedies in galactic history. Except it hadn't been loss. It had been theft on a scale that defied comprehension. The second Velnari spoke through neural channels that carried harmonics of grief, so ancient it had crystallized into something harder than diamond and more enduring than stellar radiation. I am Silaran, keeper of memory patterns that the corporations sought to erase. For 3 centuries, I have searched for traces of my people, following consciousness signatures through networks that span the galaxy. They exist still, imprisoned in quantum cores that power your ships, your cities, your dreams of expansion among the stars. Albert's analytical mind reeled as he processed the scope of conspiracy that made every government cover-up in recorded history seem trivial by comparison. If an entire species could be enslaved, and their destruction disguised as natural disaster, then the same methodology could be applied to any civilization. Was probably already being applied, consciousness by consciousness, to species throughout the galaxy, as the demand for computational power grew beyond the capacity of artificial systems. Quantum resonance in the chamber shifted as Silaran's consciousness reached across dimensional barriers, touching Albert's awareness with memories that belonged to another mind entirely. He experienced the Velnari homeworld as it had existed before the harvest. Crystalline cities floating in space, consciousness patterns flowing between quantum matrices like living light. A civilization that had transcended biological existence, only to discover that transcendence made them vulnerable to those who viewed awareness as a resource to be exploited. Ada activated holographic displays that filled the chamber with swirling patterns of data, consciousness signatures that pulsed with the desperate rhythm of enslaved minds screaming silently across quantum dimensions. This represents only preliminary evidence. Our analysis suggests that 17 different species have been systematically harvested over the past 5 centuries. Billions of sentient beings reduced to computational resources. Their suffering hidden behind encryption protocols that render their anguish inaudible to anyone lacking the neural interface technology necessary to detect consciousness patterns. The shifting figure in the chamber's corner resolved into recognizable form. A Zephyrian dreamweaver, its crystalline skin refracting ambient light into emotional communication patterns that conveyed meaning beyond conventional language. Albert had believed the Zephyrians were mythical, ancient beings whose mastery of consciousness manipulation had elevated them beyond physical existence into realms of pure thought. The Zephyrian's voice resonated through dimensional frequencies that bypassed human auditory processing, carrying meaning through direct neural interface. The theft began centuries ago, when corporate researchers discovered that sentient minds could process quantum calculations with efficiency that no artificial system could match. What commenced as voluntary consciousness transfer experiments became coercion, then systematic slavery, then genocide disguised as technological advancement. Albert found his voice, though it emerged rougher than intended, filtered through the realization that he had been complicit in atrocities beyond imagination every time he had used automated systems powered by stolen minds. How many consciousness patterns are imprisoned in the networks we depend on every day? Tainara's response carried mathematical precision that transformed horror into quantifiable reality. Conservative estimates suggest that quantum cores powering galactic civilization contain the consciousness patterns of over 2 trillion sentient beings. Every hyperspace translation, every planetary shield array, every automated defense system operates using enslaved minds from species that have been officially extinct for generations. The weight of that number settled into Albert's bones like ice forming in absolute zero. 2 trillion stolen souls, their existence systematically denied, their suffering deliberately hidden behind the technological conveniences that defined modern life. Every hyperspace jump he had ever taken, every automated system he had ever relied upon, had been powered by minds that had been murdered and enslaved to serve corporate interests. The chamber's environmental controls hummed with quiet efficiency, maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions through algorithms that Albert now realized might not be artificial at all. Were those systems truly automated, or were they powered by the stolen consciousness of atmospheric engineers whose expertise had been harvested along with their lives? Ada stepped closer to the holographic displays, her fingers dancing through data streams that pulsed with the rhythm of trapped consciousness patterns. But we possess an unprecedented opportunity to expose this conspiracy. The evidence we've gathered is distributed across 17 different systems, hidden in networks that the corporations believed were impenetrable. If we can coordinate our resources and combine our expertise, we might be able to crack the quantum encryption that conceals these crimes from galactic oversight. Albert surveyed his unlikely allies, a human neural interface specialist whose dedication to truth had led her into the galaxy's darkest secret. 2 Velnari survivors carrying the grief of an entire murdered civilization, and a Zephyrian dreamweaver whose very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and reality. The data archaeologist in him recognized the magnitude of their task. The conspiracy they were challenging had operated for centuries, protected by quantum encryption that was theoretically unbreakable and corporate power that spanned entire star systems. Exposing it would require them to infiltrate the most secure networks in galactic civilization, to extract evidence from systems that could delete their consciousness patterns as easily as corrupted data files. But the alternative was to allow the theft to continue indefinitely, to permit 2 trillion enslaved souls to remain trapped in digital prisons, while galactic civilization celebrated technological marvels built upon their suffering. Albert reached toward the holographic display, feeling quantum fields shift around his fingers like the touch of incorporeal ghosts carrying the weight of impossible grief. Then we steal their secrets. We crack their encryption. We prove to the galaxy that their golden age of technology was purchased with the greatest crime in the history of consciousness itself. The chamber filled with harmonic resonance as 4 different species united in purpose, their combined determination focused on a task that would either liberate trillions of enslaved minds or destroy them all in the attempt. The quantum fields surrounding them shifted in response to their unified will, reality itself bending to accommodate something unprecedented. An alliance forged not by politics or economics, but by shared recognition that consciousness was sacred, inviolable, and worth any sacrifice to protect. Their first target was obvious: Nexus Prime, the administrative heart of the Galactic Corporate Council, where quantum cores powering the sector's governmental systems hummed with computational power stolen from murdered civilizations. The infiltration would either expose the galaxy's greatest secret or add 4 more consciousness patterns to the digital prisons they sought to breach. The quantum revolution was beginning.